All right. Congratulations again. My name is Rebecca Tinder. I'm the West Virginia We the People Coordinator and your Unit 4 facilitator. Our judges have arrived. They will introduce themselves and the students will introduce themselves and their teacher, and then we shall begin.
Hello, Connecticut, Unit 4. I'm excited to be here. I did a different unit over the weekend, so I'm looking forward very much to your testimony today. My name is Lynn Simons, and I'm the Chief Judge of the 2nd Judicial District Court in the state of Nevada. And Love We the People have participated at every level except for a participant because they didn't have it. So I'm dating myself. But I think what's important is I know you're all a bag of nerves. You've been waiting for a long time today for this moment. So just take a deep breath and we're going to have a great conversation.
So now that you've taken a deep breath, now you can release and exhale because we wouldn't want you falling over because you can't breathe. We will have fun. I'm Hank Chambers. I'm a law professor at the University of Richmond. Of course, I saw you a couple of days ago. You all did a tremendous job there. That's why you're here. I expect the same thing with a couple of additional minutes for Q&A. So I look forward to a good, fun conversation this afternoon.
And I'm Joe Stewart. When we saw you last, we told you that we wish we had more time to talk. We do now. So we came back to have a longer conversation with you. I think I'm still at Clemson University and still involved in the We the People program. Very much enjoyed talking with you before, and let's have some more fun today.
And would you please introduce yourselves and your teacher?
Good afternoon, judges. We're Unit 4, and our unit focuses on how the values and principles embodied in our Constitution shape our nation's institutions and practices. My name is Pranav Kodakara, and next year I'll be studying computer science at the University of Michigan.
Good afternoon, judges. My name is Maria DiMartino, and I will be studying political science at the University of Wisconsin at Madison next year.
Hello, I'm Marty McGrath, and I'll be studying electrical engineering at Montana Technical University.
Good afternoon. My name is Rana Ahmad, and I'll be studying chemical engineering at the University of Southern California. For now, we're all seniors at Trumbull High School, and it's our coach, Ms. Boland. We thank you for being here today.
All right, as you said, the general description of Unit 4, specifically, we're going to talk about question 2. The president, quote, ought to communicate such papers as the public good would permit and ought to refuse those the disclosure of which would injure the public. Do you agree or disagree that the executive can withhold or disclose information at her or his discretion? To what extent, if any, has the claim of executive privilege expanded presidential power since its inception? Are the constitutional powers that enable the other two branches to counter executive privilege claims sufficient? Why or why not? You may begin.
On January 9th, in Trump versus Thompson, the Supreme Court rejected a request by former President Donald Trump to prevent the National Archives from releasing White House records that the January 6th Select Committee had requested for its investigation into that day's events. The former president claimed executive privilege to withhold this information.
Chief Justice Berger noted in U.S. versus Nixon that the president does not have an absolute unqualified privilege to withhold information. He said, absent a claim to protect national, diplomatic, or sensitive military security secrets, we find it difficult to accept the absolute confidentiality of presidential communications.
While executive privilege is not explicitly mentioned within our Constitution, it is an implied power laid out in Article 2 intended to maintain the balance of power between the branches. John Locke first spoke about this need for executive prerogative for the public good. Today, there are two main reasons for withholding information: reasons of national security and reasons of executive branch communications.
We agree with Thomas Jefferson that it is impossible for the president to govern effectively without withholding information that would injure the public. The Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Reynolds that the military may refuse to release requested information when national security is at stake, noting that there would be times when evidence in the interest of national security should not be divulged.
Additionally, the president may withhold information regarding the recordings of their advisors. As the court ruled in New York Times Company versus the United States, in order for advisors to give open and candid advice and offer all possible solutions. They must remain confident that this discussion will remain confidential.
There have been many instances throughout American history in which executive privilege has greatly expanded the powers of the president.
President Andrew Jackson refused a demand by the United States Senate to turn over a list of advisors who he had consulted before moving money from the National Bank to the State Bank.
President Dwight Eisenhower invoked executive privilege more than 40 times during the McCarthy hearings. He famously stated, "Any man that testifies as to the advice he told me won't be working for me that night."
President George W. Bush invoked executive privilege 6 times in response to congressional subpoenas requesting documents about the firing of 8 U.S. attorneys in 2006.
However, this does not mean that the president can or should be able to withhold any information without scrutiny. United States versus Bush showed that the presidential power can be checked. Although the courts did not order President Jefferson to turn over the documents, they stated that the courts did have the power to do so.
Since men are not angels, Madison put in place auxiliary precautions to keep the branches in check. U.S. versus Nixon narrowly defined the use of executive privilege. During the Clinton administration, his use of executive privilege claims were challenged in a federal court, which determined that the prosecutor's need outweighed the confidentiality of executive documents and discussions.
Congressional investigations and oversight serve as another check on the executive branch. When the president decides to claim privilege, Congress can issue subpoenas to provide transparency to the American people. The president can refuse to comply with these subpoenas, leading to the involvement of the courts.
From the earliest days until present, Congress and the White House have resolved their theoretical tug-of-war over executive privilege through the give and take of the political process. When the two branches can't work out their disagreements, the Article 3 branch may step in as the umpire.
Maintaining the separation of powers between the 3 branches of our government is and always has been a cornerstone of our democracy. It is for that reason that Americans must continue to watch the president's use of executive privilege with cautious skepticism. The alternative, as Madison explained, is tyranny.
Thank you. We're now ready for your questions.
So focusing on the legislative branch, what overt checks do you deem appropriate based on your review of case law and constitutional application? And what type of soft checks are there that are really practical?
One of the main examples that we see between the legislative branch and the executive branch are congressional investigations for executive privilege. Congress can usually investigate the president when the president invokes executive privilege for a reason other than national security or the consultation of advisors between the executive branch communications. So over time, we've seen many examples of congressional investigation for times when the president goes beyond their scope. For example, we've seen investigations in Trump versus Mazars, where former President Trump invoked executive privilege for his tax returns, and for United States versus Nixon with the Watergate scandal, where former President Nixon tried to invoke executive privilege for the Watergate tapes, when this is rather personal priority and personal purpose rather than national security.
In addition to that, another check that the legislative branch has on the executive power is the power to oversight. And this is implied in the essence of the Article 1. Being the legislative body, it is the right of the Congress to make sure that their legislations that they put out are being carried out properly by the executive branch and its agencies. So this is a check that goes on constantly, and it's not something that can occur like the investigations by one major event, but it's being carried out 365 days a year.
Additionally, in terms of soft checks, in speaking with our own Senator Chris Murphy, he said that he leads the fight in Congress to find out more information from the president and make sure that there is clear transparency between the president and Congress. And we see that Federalist 41 highlights this need for Congress to know about national security when it comes to declaring wars. So I think that is important for the president to disclose this information to Congress when it comes to this ideas of national security.
Given the information over which the executive has claimed privilege, should we ever trust the president when the president claims executive privilege?
I think that we have to trust the president at times, but I think that also, as you've said, there's been a great abuse of this power. We see it's not even merely the executive that can claim privilege anymore. Even though this is a presidential power, we now see in something like Cheney versus United States, where then Vice President Dick Cheney was able to incorporate executive privilege not just for himself, but also for his advisors, which were not even elected officials. In this case, they were oil executives, and they had tried to use Freedom of Information Act to gain information into his counsel because he was making a decision on an oil issue that benefited those executives. But it's been extended to Vice President Cheney and his counsel, and I think that's a dangerous precedent to set.
In addition to that, to go on to Marty's point, the power of executive privilege has been expanding in conjunction with the power of the executive itself. As we have seen since the presidency of former President FDR, and this power has been constantly growing, and this line is being crossed. As we've seen even with the most recent investigation of the January 6th committees, multiple of Trump advisors have been trying to claim executive privilege, or members of former President Trump's family, really crossing that line of this privilege that was only confined to the president.
I believe that as American citizens, we need to always monitor the executive's use of privilege with cautious skepticism, as we mentioned earlier. In Federalist 48, we see the idea of separation of powers in the midst of checks and balances. We need the three branches of government to continuously place checks and balances on each other's powers to ensure that they never go beyond what is initially granted to them with the Constitution. So I think that as representatives that are for the people, the Congress needs to continuously administer and investigate the executive's use of privilege.
Do you think Eisenhower's use of executive privilege was too broad, too narrow, or just about right?
I think one of the main issues with Eisenhower's use of executive privilege is that we see throughout the Eisenhower administration that he was doing dealings with Texan oil executives and greatly increasing his own personal wealth at the expense of the American people. For example, he gave the land outside of the mile, I think it's a 10-mile radius outside of Texas in the waters was given to Texas as property as opposed to federal property, so that oil executives could use, and in turn oil executives gifted Eisenhower a large amount of material for his farm in an Augusta National Course house. And I think that for the American people to see this and not understand why he's doing these things or be able to see the logic behind it, I think that's a dangerous precedent to set.
Okay.
I would say that President Dwight used this power too much. We see that, as we mentioned in our speech, he famously quoted that any man who testifies against him won't be working for him that night. And I think this is abuse of his power by trying to claim privilege over his cabinet members before they even get to testify or know what is being subpoenaed for them and what they have to request. So I think about sitting and claiming this privilege before we even know what is being requested is an overreach of this privilege.
Anytime a single president invokes executive privilege for 44 times, mostly through one congressional investigation, I would say that that is too much.
And if we remember where this privilege comes from and the ideals embodied behind it, we can go back to Locke's chapter, John Locke's writing in chapter 14, stating that this power was not for the benefit of the president, but for the benefit of the people. So if this applies to the people and we people, Americans of the United States, then it's appropriate. Otherwise, a line needs to be drawn.
Okay, let me push back from the other side. Let's say that I argue that it is in the public's interest to have an effective presidency. And the quote said that the president should only withhold, refuse disclosure of those that would injure the public. Why should we limit ourselves to use of executive privilege based on national security or consultation?
I think that we should limit ourselves to executive privilege and only to these two things, because as American citizens, we need to be informed, have transparency is what is going on in our government. Historian David Adler said that we must be Madisonian monitors. We must know what is happening in our government so that we can be informed citizens and make the right decisions and know who is representing us and what is happening.
As Justice Brandeis said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. We need transparency among the three branches of our government so the American citizens know what is going on with the government.
In Federalist 59, it was highlighted how the president is not a monarch. We, as a colony, we were just going out of this tyranny of a crown. And for the president to abuse this privilege that has been given to them, it will be the start of a tyranny. And if we even expand it more, we will become an oligarchy. That's why we have to keep this power in check.
When you talk about allowing instances of security, isn't this a much different picture today than it was in yesteryear? Because security can include cybersecurity, global cybersecurity, national cybersecurity, military. Is your position that it's any and all things that could be described as security-based?
I believe that is up for the government to decide at the given time. We see right now the January 6th insurrection and the investigations into that. That is of national security. That's why the investigations right now are closed, although they will be open in a few months, hopefully May. So I think that national security really does have a broad scope, a broad umbrella, because it is up for the government to decide at the time. National security has gone from January 6th insurrection to the 9/11 attack. So I think that is up for the government to decide at the time.
So when you say the government, that's up for the government to decide, what do you mean?
I think that is up for Congress to decide at the time. I should specify, sorry. So congressional investigation is what we need for a check on the presidency. So I think the executive can invoke executive privilege, and then Congress has to investigate to deem whether it is appropriate for national security.
And to go back to your previous question, as we are growing in a digital country, in a digital world where barriers are non-existent anymore, we can access mostly any kind of information on social media, which pose a threat to the executive branch and our government. And this is where the executive privilege really power is being threatened, as more information is being disclosed, as may I finish my thought, please?
You may.
As the fourth branch of government or the media is trying to capitalize on this new breaking news or new information.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Connecticut. I enjoyed your testimony and your Q&A. And your theme in that there needs to be scrutiny, but you also indicated cautious skepticism, but trying to reconcile that with a call for transparency. And I think just the way that just those three things tell us all that this is a challenging unit, it's a challenging question, and the grappling with it bespeaks that. I thought that you had a great cadence and you had some not only strong evidence, but also some practical observations which provided context. Thank you very much.
I thought it was really good stuff. The opening was strong, and we obviously we'd seen much of it before. Really good stuff. There are difficulties in drawing lines, as you all well saw. It's just a hard question. Right? The president wants to keep information away from folks, sometimes for good reason, sometimes for bad reason, and Congress wants information, usually for good reason, sometimes for not so great reasons, but still they generally have a right to get that information. So as you all noted, the lines are real tough and difficult to draw. What I particularly appreciated was the discussion regarding Eisenhower. And the reason why is not just because it's somewhat obscure. The reason why is because you mentioned it, and then when we went back to it, you actually knew the key issues that matter to the actual argument. And let me say, that's not always the case, even with folks who have made it to day 3. So I really appreciated that discussion regarding Eisenhower and background stuff. I could have gotten into it a little bit more in terms of asking, hey, look, he's a military guy. Is it any surprise that he wanted to keep everything quiet? But like, really good stuff. Nice job representing Connecticut, and good luck the rest of the afternoon.
I agree. And the question I asked was one pushing you, throwing you a curveball, and that, whether you appreciate it or not, is a sign that I think you can handle it. So I wanted you to look at things from a different perspective. And I thought you handled it very well. In fact, I think you handled the whole hearing very well. So congratulations. Very good job representing the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.